So the reason why I wanted to show you a clip from this TED Talk, and I do have the entire TED Talk linked for y'all in case you want to watch the entire thing, but this young woman is talking about the categories that she places herself in, right? And she gives this beautiful list of all the different categories she's in. But then she transitions that to tell us about all of the categories or stereotypes that she's placed in by other people. And she says that when we don't ask someone their name, we're not asking for their story. And it goes back to this idea that's on these two pages, 82 and 83, that idea of us versus them, or just the idea that you're going to use the word them to place a group of people in and say they're all the same. Now, on page 83 in our book, we take it further than just saying there's us and then there's them. We somehow make it about how us, the we, are better than they, the them. And on the top of 83, but just as crucially, it allows us to justify how we treat them. And so your book is saying it's not just about the fact that we categorize people when we walk into a cafeteria so that we know where to sit, so we don't feel like we're in danger of making a fool of ourselves, sitting at the wrong table, maybe, sitting next to somebody who's going to be cruel and unkind to us. But it goes further than that when we actually take those stereotypes and we treat people differently based upon them. Now, in your book, they mention this on 83, but the start of this section that is called A Slip of the Brain on page 77 actually gives a little bit more detail in the breakdown of this. And so I'm actually going to show you the clip, since a lot of times we don't get an opportunity to watch it while we're reading. And so if you'll just look in your book on page 77 at the bottom and just sort of follow along, they take you through this situation.
Why is it that there are no black managers, no black general managers, no black owners?
Well, Mr. Koppel, there have been some black managers, but I really can't answer that question directly. The only thing I can say is that you have to pay your dues when you become a manager. Generally, you have to go to minor leagues. There's not very much pay involved. And some of the better-known black players have been able to get into other fields and make a pretty good living in that way.
Yeah, but you know in your heart of hearts, and we're going to take a break for a commercial, you know that that's a lot of baloney. I mean, there are a lot of black players, there are a lot of great black baseball men who would dearly love to be in managerial positions. And I guess what I'm really asking you is to, peel it away a little bit. Just tell me, why do you think it is? Is there still that much prejudice in baseball today?
No, I don't believe it's prejudice. I truly believe that they may not have some of the necessities to be, let's say, a field manager or perhaps a general manager.
You really believe that?
Well, I don't say that they're all of them, but they certainly are short.
Now, this clearly can be a little uncomfortable to watch, especially if you already read through this section, because this is something that happened in 1987. And when the reporter was asking him these questions, he even brought up, well, this is kind of BS because we were saying this 40 years ago about black players. So if we're looking at this scenario by itself and looking at the physical language that he used, he was categorizing a particular race based upon using the word they. And he was saying they don't have blank. Now, this can be very hurtful, very problematic, especially if you look at the two examples that I just provided. We can categorize ourselves all day long, but stereotypes hurt And they actually do a lot of damage to not only the person who you are stereotyping, but yourself. It doesn't open yourself up to maybe new experiences, new people, a better understanding of the world. And on page 79, he actually says, I don't believe that this is prejudice. And so I'll just ask you to pause for a moment after you watch that video clip and ask yourself, is this prejudice? Is he forming a stereotype based upon prior knowledge or just certain experiences that he went through? And this is probably the most powerful part of this whole entire text. When we're looking at stereotypes and prejudice and this cognitive dissonance that forms, on the bottom of 79 it says, just as we can identify hypocrisy in everyone but ourselves, just as obvious that others can be influenced by money but not ourselves, so we can see prejudices in everyone but ourselves. Thanks to our ego-preserving blind spots, we cannot possibly have a prejudice, which is an irrational or mean-spirited feeling about all members of another group. Because we are not irrational or mean-spirited, any negative feelings we have about another group must be justified. Our dislikes are rational and well-founded. It's the other group's negative feelings we need to suppress. So you can kind of see how in this section, what it's really trying to talk about is the simple fact that, like it said on the very first page of the introduction, we are all fallible human beings. We make mistakes. Doctors make mistakes. Lawyers make mistakes. Police officers make mistakes. Your friends and family, your loved ones, your teachers, even the president. Everybody makes mistakes because we're imperfect, we're human, and that's completely natural. And in the introduction, it kind of says, so why don't we own up to these mistakes? Why don't we spend time trying to figure out how we can be better people? Why do we constantly put other people down just to lift ourselves up higher? And in chapter 1, we started learning about these other ways in which our cognitive process actually reflects this in a more natural way, right? We find ourselves going through lots of cognitive dissonance, that state of tension between two ideas. And in order to reduce that headache, that dissonance, we justify our bad behavior. We justify mistakes we've made. And it's hard for us to own up to them. So why are they talking about this in chapter 2 then? This is just another layer of critical thinking. Now that you've thought about the fact that you are imperfect and everybody else is, you've thought about the fact that everybody justifies their bad behavior and doesn't own up to their mistakes, how do categories and stereotypes and prejudice fit into that? And your book says, and this is in the title of the chapter, these are what we call blind spots. And your book, remember, defines blind spots on page 57, saying that the brain is designed with blind spots, optical and psychological, and one of its cleverest tricks is to confer on its owner the comforting delusion that he or she does not have any. In a sense, dissonance theory is a theory of blind spots. So blind spots are, once again, let's pretend we're a horse and we are in downtown Charleston. Remember, they have these blinders on, right? So that they just see forward. They don't see to their left. They don't see to their right. I used that as a comparison of what impediments are. But blind spots are very similar to that in your brain. Most of the time you don't know they're there, thus the word blind. But we can also use the illustration of a truck, for example. So you can see To my left here, we have cars that usually, if they look to the right or the left of them or to the rearview mirror, they can see all around them. But this big truck that's in the middle actually has very large blind spots, and this actually prevents the truck from being as safe as they possibly could on the road, right? So it's the car's responsibility in part to watch out for the truck's blind spots. Now, if we're using this as an illustration, that seems like we're putting a lot of pressure on the person who's not responsible for actually having the blind spot. And this actually is part of your responsibility as a critical thinker now. As you learn about your own blind spots and recognize them, you become better and better at navigating them. Just like when you see a seasoned truck driver out on the road, you expect them to know where all their blind spots are and still drive safely. Now, occasionally you will meet someone, and you will learn more about this when we get into the other chapters, that sometimes people don't know their own blind spots. They don't know that they are prejudiced. They don't understand when somebody calls them racist. They can't really get it through their minds why you would say to them, you know, you're a very biased person. This person means that maybe they have some blind spots that they haven't quite figured out yet. Sometimes we don't want to take the time to figure it out, and other times no one's ever mentioned it to us, or we just haven't learned these concepts or tools or tricks in order to process information and always check ourselves. And so the rest of chapter 2 and the rest of the module material and the other stuff you're going to read the next couple of weeks all go back to this idea of self-checks and being consistent in doing so. Because we want to be the safe driver on the road, whether it be we're in a car with little to no blind spots or this big truck with many.